Do you want to be among the best controller players in Apex Legends? Well, in this video, I have 50 tips specifically for anyone on controller. I tried to make this the single best video on the internet if you want to improve your controller skills. So drop a like if you enjoy, and starting with tip 1, I would suggest learning how to play claw. The claw is basically when you use your index finger to hit the buttons on the upper right of your controller. And this allows you to hit all of your buttons without ever having to take your thumb off the right thumbstick. Now, it will definitely take some time to get good with this, but it is well worth it. But if you just don't feel like committing to learning claw, you're going to want to get a controller with buttons or paddles on the back. It isn't required, but it will make everything just a slight bit easier. So as you probably know, looting a death box as a controller player is very risky, as you're just standing still and you're a very easy target. Now what if I told you you can crouch in the death box? To do this, you need to go into your button layout and set crouch to something other than B or circle. Now by hitting that new button, you can crouch, allowing you to survive a little bit longer as enemies can't easily line up their headshots. If you're on controller, I'm sure you found yourself in a situation where you're holding a door and you need to reload. But unfortunately for us, the reload button is the same button you use to open the door. Now there is one workaround, and that is to force reload your gun. And to do that, you have to shoot out all the ammo in your weapon. It's not perfect, but it is the best option we got. Now this next tip will make you a much better player and can completely eliminate vertical recoil from your gun. So when you shoot, your gun kicks up. But when you are moving your thumbstick horizontally, the vertical kick is no longer there. So what you want to do to abuse this mechanic is strafe in one direction while pulling your thumbstick in the opposite direction. So if you're strafing to the right, pull your aim to the left, and vice versa. In an Apex, we call this recoil smoothing. It just really helps with controlling that recoil. But if you want to use this against your enemies in close to mid-range fights, you're going to want to follow tip 6, counter strafing. This strafing tech is self-explanatory. You want to be strafing in the opposite direction of your enemy strafe. So if they're moving to the right from your point of view, you should strafe to the left. And of course, if they're moving to the left, you should strafe to the right. This strafing technique makes recoil smoothing much easier. And I can guarantee you that every pro player you watch uses this trick. The other strafing technique is mirroring, and it's the polar opposite of counter strafing. You simply strafe in the same direction as your enemy. It isn't as effective for recoil control, but for single fire weapons like the wingman, I find it is much better. You're pretty much doing all of the tracking with your left thumbstick, then all you need to do with your right thumbstick is make micro adjustments to get your reticle onto the enemy. And it also tends to mess up players that are trying to counter strafe when you're mirror strafing them. It just confuses them and they don't know what to do. Now tip 8, you should be using ALC per optic setting. I'm not telling you to use advanced look controls for your sensitivity, but you should definitely use them for your per optics. And if you want to use them, all you have to do is make sure your default per optic settings are turned off, open up advanced look controls, go to per optic settings and set them to whatever you like. And if you aren't sure what you want to use, you can just copy the ones that I'm using. Make sure you leave them turned on and then turn off custom look controls. And then this just lets you fine tune your sensitivity with each optic. As a controller player, your strength lies in the ability to quickly one clip your enemy. And you don't want to be wasting all of your ammo missing your shots. When an enemy is moving in a way that makes them difficult to hit, such as when they're flying in, wait until they get the stun impact from hitting the ground, and then they should be a very easy target. Yeah, they'll pretty much lose all their movement and then you should be able to light them up. Back into our settings, I would highly recommend turning on auto sprint. In Apex, you're constantly clicking a ton of buttons all the time, and freeing up one more by turning on auto sprint will help a lot. You can also still walk as long as you don't push all the way forward on your left thumbstick. And turning on auto sprint also helps the lifespan of your controller, as you won't develop stick drift quite as fast. And this is because you don't have to be constantly pushing down on your left thumbstick to sprint. Now at tip 11, focus on crosshair placement. Put simply, crosshair placement is keeping your crosshair positioned wherever you think an enemy is likely to appear. On controller, it is very important, since it takes us quite a while to flick our crosshair to the enemy. So if it is already close enough to them, getting our first shots off will be much faster. You should be hip firing more often. Anytime the enemy is too close or is moving too fast for your sensitivity to keep up, then you should definitely be hip firing. Your strafe speed is also slower while aiming down sights, so you will be a much harder target to kill if you aren't always ADS. And the accuracy of your weapon while hip firing is a lot better than you think. I know this kind of sucks, but if you want to get better, try to focus on playing mostly just Apex on controller. Unfortunately, on controller, every game feels a little bit different for aiming, and if you're constantly switching between games, your aim will never get comfortable in Apex. Of course, have fun, it's just a video game, but if you have the option, I would use mouse and keyboard for other games so you don't mess up your aim for Apex. At long range, use your left thumbstick to make micro adjustments in your aim. So at longer ranges, you don't have much aim assist at all, and it's going to be hard to aim with that right thumbstick. So I find that lining up your shots by strafing until your reticle is on the enemy is much easier. Now, if you want to improve, don't try to emulate a mouse and keyboard player's playstyle. If you're trying to play as if you were a Fade, I'm sorry to say this, but you're going to end up losing most of your fights. Mouse and key and controller have different strengths and you need to be playing to yours. I would suggest watching a lot of controller pro players gameplay to see their playstyle, and you will learn a lot more that you can implement into your own gameplay. You have no aim assist with any of the sniper optics, and honestly, I would pretty pretty much never use them if you're on controller. Even a sniper with iron sights will be better most of the time because you're going to be hitting a lot more shots. You also have no aim assist when shooting through barred windows, but I still recommend taking a few shots through them when you have the opportunity. But I would rarely ever suggest taking a full 1v1 shooting through the windows, as your aim is going to be a lot worse than you'd expect. But sometimes you can get away with it if you know the other player is also on controller. You also don't have any aim assist through smoke, so just be careful whenever you're playing with or against a Bangalore. So again, looting death boxes on controller can be risky. Another trick to help keep some movement is to jump right before you open the death box. This allows you to get a shield swap quickly without taking quite as much damage. You can also even chain this into a slide after to help stay alive. As far as your sensitivity goes, a slower sense is better in most cases. It allows you to be much more consistent with your aim, and if you look at the pro players, almost all of them use a slow sensitivity. I would suggest either 4.3 or 4.4. That is going to be the sweet spot for most players. And then again, you could always use that per optic ALC settings tip I showed you to fine tune your sensitivity to suit you. With controller, you can have one healing item in the quick select spot. Now, it's important you always know what you have there so you can start healing as quickly as possible in tight situations. I would recommend keeping shield batteries in your quick select pretty much all of the time, with the exception of if you're playing out of the ring, in which case you should either have your med kit or syringes selected, because of course you don't want to be dying to zone damage. You need to be prioritizing aim over movement. Sure, movement is flashy and certainly can help you out, but aim is more important in almost every situation. So make sure your sensitivity and playstyle allows you to hit as many shots as possible and abuse your aim assist. Think about it, you can have the best movement in the world, but if you don't have good aim, you aren't going to be winning your gunfights. Try to take isolated 1v1s. With aim assist, you have the aim advantage over all the mouse and keyboard players. And unless they are a 5,000 hour Kovacs player, you should win the 1v1. But as soon as you put yourself in a 1v2 or a 1v3 fight, the enemies will quickly overwhelm you and take you out. So yeah, just always try to take isolated 1v1s when possible. You should play with your survival slot button turned on. And this will allow you to quickly use your survival items by clicking left on the D-pad. Now I personally play with it turned off, and that's because it allows me to inspect my alien with left on the D-pad. But then if I want to use one of my survival items, I need to open up my inventory and then click on it. And if you need to use it quickly, like if you're stuck in the ring and need a heat shield, the extra 1 or 2 seconds could cause you to lose the match. Halfway through the video, make sure you hit the subscribe button if you enjoyed, as we're getting close to 100,000 subscribers. Then another important controller setting is turning your vibration off. All it does is shake your controller, which will cause you to have less control of your thumbstick and worse aim in general. I know it might feel good, but I've talked about this a few times already. You're not your mom, you don't need the vibrations. Turn it off and your aim will thank you. Then if you ever get the Kraber, the best way to use it is to simply drop it and ping it for your mouse and keyboard teammate. Nah, but in all seriousness, if you do have a teammate on mouse and keyboard, I would suggest just giving them the Kraber, as their aim with it will most likely be much better than yours, as you have no aim assist with it. And yeah, they're just gonna be hitting a lot more shots as they have their entire arm to use, and all you have is your little thumb. But if you want to make the most out of your thumbstick aiming, I would recommend using extended thumbstick. Some custom controllers will have the option for longer sticks, or you can put on Control Freaks or some other brand of thumbstick extension. The longer thumbstick gives you more control over your aim, and it also decreases the amount of force you need to push the thumbstick out of its dead zone. It will take you a few games to get used to, but it's definitely worth trying out. And they're also fairly cheap to pick up. Then another controller mod that can help you out are trigger stops. So what they do is make the triggers on your controller feel more like a mouse button, which if you ever tried, you know it feels a lot better. It makes it easier to trigger finger single fire weapons, as you don't need to push in as far. They also believe that it keeps the bumpers on your controller from breaking. So if you find your bumpers always get worn out, trigger stops might be a good investment. Now I'm sure you have heard about players talk about crouch spamming, but you should almost never be using it while aiming down sights and shooting your weapon. It will make your aim a lot worse if you're constantly bobbing up and down. The exceptions are if you're using a single fire weapon like a sniper or a shotgun, then I would crouch between my shots. Or if you're a hip firing, as I find crouch spamming won't be as detrimental to your aim. And if you're hip firing and crouch spamming close range gunfight, the added movement will definitely keep you alive longer. Then in terms of weapons, SMGs reign supreme. It all depends on the current meta, but the majority of the time, if close range weapons like SMGs are good, then they're going to be the best choice for you. The one clip potential with an SMG and aim assist is way too strong to overlook. And as you can see, half the footage in this video is exactly that. Now when you are holding your controller, try to have a more loose grip. If you death grip your controller, you will find your aim is very choppy and rigid. And then when you have a more relaxed grip, your aim is much more smooth. I also recommend playing with your controller plugged in to minimize input delay. And if you play on PC, you should use a USB 3.0 port on the back of your computer so you can have even less input delay. With a mouse and keyboard, when you holster your weapon, you can easily choose which weapon you want to pull out after. But on controller, you're kind of stuck pulling out the gun you were last holding. This is why I suggest switching to the weapon you're going to want before holstering. And if you don't know which one you're going to need, I would use the close range weapon in case someone someone gets a jump on you. An alternative is to open your inventory and click on the weapon you want to pull out. It is difficult to do fast unless you have some really good mechanics, but if you can get it down, that could be an option. As a controller player, get really confident in your aim. Keep on practicing until you can get into almost any 50-50 fight and trust that your aim is enough to win it for you. Then if you're wondering how you can get some top tier mechanics on controller, take your friend into the firing range and 1v1 them and actually play as if you're in a match. Use the normal weapons you would use cover, and try out some movement tech. If you need someone to queue up with and 1v1, join my Discord channel in the description below. We have a community of over 500 Apex players just like you. Now looking back at your sensitivity, try switching from a classic response curve to linear. It will feel weird at first, but once you get used to it, you will have a lot more control over your aim. Clean your controller. This is going to minimize stick drift, and it can also help extend the lifespan of your controller. And controllers are getting pretty expensive, and you want to make them last as long as possible. Start aim centering more often. So what this is putting your crosshair over the enemy first, and then aiming down sight. Then all you need to do is make small micro adjustments to get your reticle onto the enemy. On the other hand, if you start by aiming in and then dragging your weapon to your enemy, your sensitivity is much lower while ADS, so it's going to take you a long time, as opposed to aim centering before you ADS, which is much faster. And with how good Apex players are getting, every second counts. Now this next trick abuses aim assist to give you an advantage, and that's by using aim assist to locate the real Mirage when he uses his decoys. You have no aim assist against the decoys, so it's easy to tell which ones are fake. And I think this trick is kind of dumb. If you made it this far in the video, comment buff Mirage, and hopefully one of the devs will see this video. Now once again, back into our setting. You should set your crouch button to hold. You will have much more control over your crouch button, as you can use it a lot faster. Then it also makes some movement tech such as bunny hopping much easier. And no matter what, you should be warming up before playing, whether it's in the firing range with your friend or loading up a deathmatch. It doesn't really matter how you do it, but you want to be warming up, as in Apex you might only fight a couple of enemies in an entire 20-minute match. And if you aren't warm, you're probably going to be losing those fights. One way I like to do this is before playing or even after a ranked session is to hop into a mixtape playlist and either watch YouTube or a live stream. It allows me to turn off my brain and watch something interesting while honing in on my mechanics. So I've mentioned a few techniques to make control looting a little bit safer, but at the end of the day, you always need to be careful how long you spend looting, as it makes you a very easy target for anyone nearby. Set your interact/reload to tap to use and reload. This makes everything a little bit faster for you. Try to play it on as high of an FPS as possible, and it's going to help with your aim. If you're on PC, set all of your video settings to low to get the most FPS. Then if you're on console, you have the option to switch from balanced to performance mode. You will need a 120 Hz monitor to use this, and if you don't already have one, I would highly recommend investing in one. It will improve your gameplay a lot. You can find some really good ones from Amazon for only around $100. It might sound like a lot, but it's cheaper than most custom controllers and a lot cheaper than buying an heirloom. If you're going to be playing the game a lot, especially if you do use a claw grip, you need to be stretching out your hand. It's not too important for short sessions, but as soon as you start playing for upwards of 2 or more hours in a single day, you need to start doing some hand stretches to avoid any injuries. I get a lot of people asking me what dead zone they should use. And I always say either use none or small. You will have a lot of stick drift if you use none, no matter what controller you have, and you'll have some stick drift if you use small, but it will give you a lot more control over your aim. And the stick drift doesn't really have any real effect while you are tracking your enemy. And low key, it kind of feels like it helps out with aim assist. Now using no dead zone does make snipers and the wingman a bit harder to use just because of that stick drift, which is why I personally use small dead zone. You need to be always predicting your enemy's movements before they make them. With a controller, to switch which direction you are pulling your aim, you need to move your thumbstick all the way over the middle axis before it switches direction, as compared to mouse and keyboard where you can instantly switch directions. And because of this, even with aim assist, it is essential that you either predict or react as quickly as possible whenever you know your enemy is switching directions. Slow down and try not to panic whenever you encounter a movement player. For the most part, while they are flying back and forth through the air, they aren't going to be getting very many shots off onto you. Take your time and take advantage of their poor positioning to win the fight. And tip 50, make sure you are aim training in the firing range to get the best aim possible. And to do that, you're going to need some aim training drills, which you can find in the video up on your screen now. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.